So the 2025 NFL season is officially over. The Seattle Seahawks defeated the New England Patriots 29-13 in Super Bowl 60. It was maybe a little bit of a letdown of a game. We only had 9 points in the first half. We only had 2 offensive touchdowns in this game from A.J. Barner and Matt Collins, and then we obviously got that pick 6 touchdown as well. Maybe this was an expected result. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, the NFL season is officially over, and every time the season ends right after the Super Bowl, I want to put a letter grade on every single NFL team's 2025 season one last time. And we're going to start things off in the NFC East. We'll talk about the Philadelphia Eagles, a team that was the reigning Super Bowl champions coming into this year with the expectation that they were going to at least make it to the NFC Championship game. They got off to a nice start this year, but they definitely had some bad losses that Thursday night game against the New York Giants. And then we're starting to think, okay, are they really going to go back-to-back? And then Jalen Hurts had that 4-interception game against the Los Angeles Chargers on Monday night back in December, but I still want to give the Eagles season a B. I think it could have been so much worse. I know that there was so much drama with the offensive system, with Kevin Patullo, with A.J. Brown being very vocal that he wasn't getting enough touches. Jalen Hurts was definitely underwhelming this year as well, but the fact that they ended up going 11-6 and still hosted a playoff game, I know it ended in disappointing fashion. Maybe I'm being kind of generous here for the Eagles, but I just think the defense was still amazing. I think the defense deserves an A+, and the offense probably deserves a C-. They kind of got going a little bit, beating the Vikings, the Giants, the Packers, and the Lions. It was a really nice 4-game winning streak, and then they kind of blew that game against the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday afternoon in November. All in all this year, I'm going to give the Eagles a B. There was mainly good, some bad. There's going to be a new offensive mind next year with Josh Grizzard and Sean Mannion coming over to Philadelphia. I mean, they're losing Jeff Stoutland, their offensive line coach. Who knows if any of the offensive linemen are going to retire either. Howie Roseman definitely has his work cut out for him in the offseason, but the Eagles still had, I'd say, a successful regular season in a way. I'm giving it a B. Like I said, though, if you want to give it anything lower, I could be fine with that. For the 2025 Dallas Cowboys, I'm going to be giving them a C. The Dallas Cowboys came into the season with a new head coach in Brian Schottenheimer. They ended up trading away Micah Parsons right before the season started, which basically just kind of eliminated any Super Bowl expectations they had going into the year, if there were any. And I think Brian Schottenheimer got the most out of this team this season. They ended up trading for a Logan Wilson, but a bigger name in Quinnen Williams from the New York Jets this year at the deadline. George Pickens was one of the best receivers in football this year, with or without CeeDee Lamb, because he had some injuries this year. I thought Dak was great. Javonte Williams was great as well. And it looks like they're going to overhaul this defense in the offseason. I'm going to give the Cowboys a C. They went 7-9-1. They had that tie against the Green Bay Packers. When they were decent underdogs in that game, they had nice wins this year against the Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles that I just talked about as well. I know they went under 500, but I think a lot of people thought this season could have been a lot worse. So I'm just going to give it a C, a fine first year with Brian Schottenheimer as their head coach. And then I'm actually going to give the New York Giants a C as well, just because Jackson Dart looks like a franchise quarterback, and that was the most important factor for the Giants this year. I think if you asked any Giants fan, would you rather Jackson Dart look a lot worse, but you end up going like 8-9, 9-8, and make it to the playoffs, but he's the reason you can't go far in the playoffs, or you take this 4-13 season, but Dart looks as legitimate as he did? I think the Giants fans would take the latter. Cam Scatabo looked great, even with Malik Neighbors going down and Scatabo as well. Jackson Dart was able to succeed. They fired Brian Daboll. They bring in John Harbaugh. We'll see how Matt Nagy does as the offensive coordinator. But this Giants team's future looks pretty exciting, right? It was Daboll's final straw. They had some really bad losses early in the year, specifically that Denver Broncos game that they just absolutely choked. They ended up losing 33-32. And that's where they could have built momentum, because they were 1-4 to start off the year. A really bad loss against the Saints, but a good win against the Chargers, who were undefeated the week prior. And then they go on to beat the Eagles Thursday night, and then they blow that game to the Denver Broncos. Then they had some bad losses later in the year. But I just think all in all, you have your franchise quarterback, running back, receiver. They're going to have some flexibility and some high draft capital this offseason as well. I'm sure Giants fans would have liked a couple more wins, and those wins were definitely on the table this year with some of their bad losses, but I think it could have been a lot worse. Jackson Dart looks good. I'm giving it a C. And the Washington Commanders here in the NFC East, I got to give this an F. They went 5-12 this year after making it to the NFC Championship game a year prior in Jada Daniels' rookie year. Now we know in hindsight, Adam Peters thought this team was way better than it actually was, and they really didn't add too much in the 2025 offseason. And when they did, it was guys older than 30. They definitely need to get younger this offseason. Cliff Kingsbury is no longer there. Dan Quinn is still the head coach, and Jaden Daniels was banged up so much in the 2025 season, only playing 7 games after winning Rookie of the Year last year in the 2024 season. The running back carousel was kind of all over the place. Terry McLaurin held out in training camp. He ends up getting a big extension. He doesn't really come through this year either. The defense was old and slow out there, and 5-12. Second worst record in this division, when you had the expectation of potentially winning the division this year with their historic Cinderella season last year and Jaden Daniels' rookie year. They have their work cut out for them this offseason as well. I'm giving them an F just based off what they did last year and still having somewhat expectations this year. I knew people thought they were going to regress, and I didn't think they were going to go 12-5 again and make it to the NFC Championship game, but the fact that they were kind of like eliminated from the playoffs essentially in week number 7, I really don't think I can give it anything higher than an F. And we'll stay on the topic of giving teams an F letter grade, the New York Jets. I know that the New York Jets didn't have super high expectations going into the year, but did you think they were going to finish with the second worst record, or at least picking number 2? I think people were a little bit higher on the Jets after their 2025 offseason and bringing in Aaron Glenn, bringing in Darren Muji as the main decision maker, as Robert Saleh was gone and Joe Douglas was gone as well. They take a somewhat of a high upside swing at Justin Fields. That was a disaster. They traded away Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams halfway through the year. They had probably the most embarrassing offensive stats in the league, with their leading passer, Justin Fields, throwing for 1,259 yards. They collectively, across Fields, Tyrod Taylor, and Brady Cook, threw for 2,385 yards this year. Their leading receiver in the 2025 season had 395 yards, and that was Garrett Wilson, who also only played 7 games. The wide receiver 2 spot was kind of a disaster. Adonai Mitchell had a nice change of pace in the second half of the year after the trade deadline as well. This Jets team has a lot of work cut out for them in the offseason. They were the last winless team as well, starting off the season 0-7. Yeah, 0-7 for the Jets this year. They end up going 3-14 in a 1 quarterback draft, and they don't even have the chance to select Fernando Mendoza. He's most likely going to the Raiders. So yeah, for the New York Jets, it's an F. And the New England Patriots, who ended up losing Super Bowl 60 to the Seattle Seahawks, I'm giving them an A. There's going to be 1 A+ throughout this video. You can probably guess who that's going to be now. And the Patriots are as close as you could have gotten to that A+. I know it was an underwhelming final game of the year against the Seattle Seahawks, and everybody's going to point at their schedule, which was objectively a little bit on the easier side this year. But hey, they beat Justin Herbert and the Chargers. They beat the elite defensive Houston Texans in round number 2, and they beat the Denver Broncos in that snow, crazy weather condition in the conference championship. The Patriots now know they have their franchise quarterback. They knew that going into the year as well, but Drake May finished runner-up to Matthew Stafford in the MVP race. He ended up going 14-3 as a starter this year in the first year with Mike Vrabel as the head coach. So a phenomenal year 1 for Vrabel, who also won Coach of the Year. Travion Henderson looked very good in the second half as well. Stevenson and Henderson were still a solid duo. The offensive line is going to have to get better. Maybe they're going to add a receiver or 2, but I thought the defense was amazing this year for the Patriots. Nobody's poaching Josh McDaniels as their offensive coordinator either, so they're going to be just fine going forward next year. They're going to be, I don't know if I want to say the favorites to win this division, because it's going to come down between them and Buffalo. So I'm very interested to see who kind of the favorite is going into the 2026 NFL season. But with this team only winning 4 games last year in Drake May's rookie year and basically just reversing their schedule 4-13 to 14-3, you can't give it anything lower than an A. For the Buffalo Bills, I thought about either going D or C here. I ultimately ended up going with a C letter grade, but if you want to give it an F, since they made it to the playoffs with a 12-5 record, they don't win the division, so they got to go on the road to start things off, but it's a playoffs that didn't have Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson or Joe Burrow, and they lost in the divisional round to Bo Nix and the Denver Broncos. You could say that the season is an F. I would say it was a successful regular season. I don't think we ever saw the Bills throughout a couple weeks stretch and really thought this is the team to beat. They could definitely make it out of the AFC because the AFC just felt wide open. But the Bills got off to a 4-0 start. Then they ended up losing to the Patriots on that Sunday night game. And we're like, okay, they're a little bit more vulnerable this year. Maybe we got to take the Patriots a little bit more seriously. Then they lost the following Monday night against the Atlanta Falcons. They would kind of be around 500 over the next few weeks. They had a nice 4-game winning streak into December, and they would beat the Jacksonville Jaguars in a close game in the wildcard round, winning 27-24, but losing to the Denver Broncos, you could say in controversial fashion. Either way, they lost that game. It was a disappointing season for the Buffalo Bills because they thought they could end up winning or at least making it to the Super Bowl this year for the first time in the Josh Allen era since there were no Mahomes, Lamar, or Joe Burrow in the playoffs. So I'm giving it a C because it was still a good season for them. But when you get to the playoffs and you have the expectations of Josh Allen and the Bills, you could honestly drop this, and I'm okay with that as well. They end up firing Sean McDermott and promoting offensive coordinator Joe Brady to the head coach position. We'll see if that changes anything next year as well, but definitely a disappointing year for Buffalo. So maybe you got to drop it lower than a C. And the Miami Dolphins, it's going to be the second F here in the AFC East. The Miami Dolphins ended up finishing the season 7-10, but it felt like a more disastrous 7-10. They lost one more game this year than they did in 2024. So that's not a crazy drop off, but they got off to a really bad start this year. 1-6 after week number 7. We thought Mike McDaniel could get fired mid-year. Tyreek Hill gets out for the year with a gruesome lower body injury. The corners were non-existent. The defensive line was terrible this year as well, and they were just giving up 30 points left and right. It got a little bit better in the second half, but it was pretty much the end of the Tua experiment. He's most likely going to be on a different team next year. They bring in Jeff Hafley. They fire Chris Greer and bring in John Eric Sullivan. Maybe we thought this was a last dance for Mike McDaniel and Tua, and it ended up being one. It was just kind of disappointing. I'm giving it an F. It's an expensive team. It's not a good defense whatsoever. They have a lot of work cut out for them in the offseason. So let's go to the Seattle Seahawks here in the NFC West, the team that ended up on top at the end of the year, winning their final game. They go 14-3 and win Super Bowl 60. It's an obvious A+ for Seattle. I can't believe they won a Super Bowl with Sam Darnold. I thought they were going to be good this year because they were good last year with Geno Smith. They went 10-7. I thought they were going to finish around that range. They win 4 more games this year, going 14-3 under Mike McDonald in year number 2. Back-to-back years, Sam Darnold ended up winning 14 games. This time, though, he gets the 1 seed in the NFC, unlike last year with Minnesota. They blow out the 49ers in the divisional round. They win maybe what felt like the real Super Bowl in the conference championship game against the Rams. And then they kind of make light work of the Patriots in the Super Bowl. They are going to lose their offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak, to the Las Vegas Raiders. But this season was just obviously a massive success. You won the Super Bowl. It's the only A+ that I'm going to give out here. They got off to a 3-2 start this year, but then they ended up just finishing so strong. Their only loss after that 3-2 start was in week 11 against the Los Angeles Rams, and they ended up losing that game 21-19. It's kind of crazy too because that 2-point conversion they had against the Rams in December felt like it just altered their season. They ended up winning in overtime. Sam Darnold, Super Bowl winner. Kenneth Walker, Super Bowl MVP. Jackson Smith-Njigba ended up winning Offensive Player of the Year and was the best receiver in the league. And this defense might not be generational, but it's definitely one of the best defenses we have seen over the last few years. They were number 1 in defensive DVOA. It was kind of like them, Houston, and maybe Denver talked about those elite defenses this year. They're not going anywhere either. They got $70 million in cap space. They have all their draft capital as well, however they want to use it. Vibes are high here in Seattle. They might get an NBA team. Man, yeah, the Emerald City is back on top. I thought about giving an A to the Los Angeles Rams, but I'm going to hold them to a little bit of a higher standard. I'm going to give them a B. They end up going 12-5 this year, finishing second in the NFC West. They end up beating the Carolina Panthers in a closer game than we thought in the wild card round in Carolina. Then they got to go on the road in the freezing cold against the Chicago Bears in the divisional round. They end up winning that game in overtime, 20-17 after that insane Caleb Williams game-tying touchdown. And then they lose a thriller to the Seattle Seahawks 27-31 in the championship game. I thought that they were going to win the Super Bowl this year. I thought for a decent amount they were the best team in the NFL. They were 9-2 and 1 point, and really them losing back-to-back games to Seattle and Atlanta kind of just solidified their fate that they had no chance at the 1 seed, right? And then they end up losing to Seattle twice this year after beating them once. They got a healthy Matthew Stafford season. Could that ever happen again? Who knows? He ends up winning MVP this year. Puka was still elite this year in 16 games. He had 1,715 yards. I thought they got a really good running back duo year out of Kyron Williams and Blake Corum. And the defense outside of the cornerbacks were almost elite as well. Sean McVay did what he did and is still one of the best coaches in the NFL. They are going to lose their offensive coordinator, Mike LaFleur, to a division rival, Arizona Cardinals. I'm giving them a B. I just think they had higher expectations going into this year, and it was still a good objective season. If you want to give it an A, that's fine with me. But I'm actually going to give the San Francisco 49ers an A. So the Niners did not make it as far as the Rams. They did not even come close to putting up a better fight against the Seattle Seahawks. They lost 41-6 in the divisional round. But when you take into account all the injuries they've had this year, the fact that this team ended up winning 12 games and winning a playoff game on the road at the Lincoln, Philadelphia, I got to give this season an A. Brock Purdy only played 9 games. Mac Jones steps in and was one of the best backup quarterbacks in the league. Christian McCaffrey felt like he sold his soul. He's always hurt, and he was by far their most healthy player this year. He plays all 17 games, was a monster running back and receiver. Juwan Jennings, George Kittle, Ricky Pearsall, all missed time this year. Brandon Ayuk doesn't even play a single snap for this team. Joey Bosa tears his ACL. Fred Warner gets hurt and misses a ton of time this year. Michael Williams, their first round pick, ends up missing a ton of time as well. And the offensive line was banged up as well. They are going to lose their defensive coordinator. Robert Saleh is now getting a head coaching job again to the Tennessee Titans. I'm just saying that I know the Rams made it further and looked better this year, but we're also taking into account expectations and just kind of things and storylines that went on throughout the year. Like the 49ers could have ended up going 8-9 this year with all their injuries. It could have been 5-12. They could have reversed their record and that would have made sense, but they go 12-5. I thought Kyle Shanahan should have won coach of the year given all the injuries they dealt with. Either way, I would say this is an A season for the 49ers. The fact that they got to the divisional round with all these injuries, it's just hats off to them. So yeah, the NFC West was arguably the best division when you're looking at the top three this year. And then you have the Arizona Cardinals, kind of like that dragon meme where they all look serious. Then you have the one goofy looking one, and that was the Cardinals this year. People were high on the Cardinals. I was definitely lower on the Cardinals this year, but I'm still going to give them an F. Jonathan Gannon ended up getting fired. They bring in Mike LaFleur from their division rival. Drew Petzing was kind of a disaster as an offensive coordinator. He's now the OC in Detroit. Kyler Murray ends up getting kind of benched after 5 games. I know he was hurt, but it felt like it was just like a phantom injury and a bench basically for their franchise quarterback who's getting paid a lot of money. Jacoby Brissett went 1-11 as a starter this year, or at least in a game where he attempted a pass. James Conner gets hurt. Trey Benson gets hurt. Marvin Harrison Jr. was a little disappointing. I mean, Troy McBride and Michael Wilson were definitely their bright spots this year and going forward for this team. The defense was kind of all over the field at times as well. One of the more impactful players was Calais Campbell. He's 39 years old. I thought Josh Sweat lived up to his contract in the offseason. And you could say the secondary with all the young guys had more good than bad. I thought Walter Nolan looked great in his 6 games in what felt like a wash year for him being on injured reserve, kind of finished off strong in a way. So yeah, the Cardinals were maybe expected to go 9-8. Maybe they could have been a surprise 10-17 this year. A lot of people like them in their West Coast system going into this year under Drew Petzing. It was just a disaster. 3-14. They're picking 3rd overall. We'll see if they have a different quarterback next year. Now let's go to the AFC West. We're going to talk about the Kansas City Chiefs. It's an F. They had the expectation to at least win the division this year. I think it's okay if they ended up losing in the conference championship game. It is so hard to go to 4 straight Super Bowls. We know that last year ended with a sour taste in their mouth, getting blown out by the Philadelphia Eagles 40-22 in the Super Bowl. 6-11 for the first time in a decade. They don't make the playoffs. They have an under 500 record. Rashee Rice gets suspended at the start of the year. He ends up coming back midway through the year. Xavier Worthy was disappointing this year. Travis Kelce was disappointing this year. I thought Mahomes did as much as he could. He ends up tearing his ACL. When it rains, it pours. Pacheco, Kareem Hunt, Brashard Smith, like these guys were kind of underwhelming for most of the part this season, and mostly the defense as well. People think Chris Jones took a step back. George Karlaftis was a little bit disappointing as well. I thought the secondary was fairly good with Jalen Watson, with Noah Williams, with Trent McDuffie. Obviously, Leo Chanel as a linebacker who's about to be a free agent was a bright spot this year. Another underwhelming offensive coordinator season as well for Matt Nagy, who's now the Giants offensive coordinator. They're bringing back an old friend in Eric Bieniemy. We'll see how the Chiefs look next year. We'll see Brett Veach actually makes some massive changes to this team this offseason. They're picking number 9. They haven't picked that high in a minute, so we'll see what they end up doing going forward. But when you're the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, you're expected to at least win the division and at the bare minimum make the playoffs. That didn't happen this year. 6-11. It's an F. For the Los Angeles Chargers, I'm going to give them a B. And honestly, you could give them an A as well. I know they didn't win a playoff game again, losing to the New England Patriots in the wildcard round, only scoring 3 points, but kind of like the 49ers. If I would have told you that the offensive line, like everybody was going to get hurt, Alt, Slater, Becton, like everybody was banged up this year, you would have been like, damn. 8-9, 7-10. They still ended up going 11-6. Marion Hampton missed a ton of time this year as well. I feel like the offense didn't really get going for most of the season either. Like Ladd McConkey was a little underwhelming. There was a little Keenan Allen. There was a little Quentin Johnson, a little Rondé Gadsden. Justin Herbert played well this year with everything considered, even got an MVP vote as well. I thought the defense was great at times, and they'd already extended Taylor Tart, who was going to be a free agent. Tui Pelotu had 13 sacks as well. I thought the secondary was really solid. They move on from Greg Roman as the offensive coordinator. They bring in Mike McDaniel. I'm excited to see him with Justin Herbert. Jesse Minter obviously got the head coaching job with the Baltimore Ravens. I think all things considered, though, it was a B season for the Chargers. And then for the Denver Broncos, I'm going to give them an A. They ended up going 14-3 3 and getting the 1 seed in the AFC. This was a fantastic year for them. I don't think anybody really expected them to win the division. I mean, it was definitely a possibility. I think they were also kind of like a online favorite going into the year with the defense and Bo Nix just being a serviceable quarterback last year as a rookie, and he was really good this year for Denver. I don't think anybody really took them seriously, but hey, they beat Buffalo, and then we're like, okay, they can actually beat New England in the conference championship game, and then we learned that Bo Nix misses that game. It's Jared Stidham. The weather conditions were a disaster. They end up losing 7-10, but this was a phenomenal year for the Denver Broncos as well, starting off the season with a 12-2 record after 14 weeks. Bo Nix was great. RJ Harvey looked good in the second half. J.K. Dobbins, when he was healthy this year, was good. They did all this with basically getting nothing out of Evan Ingram. And like the Seattle Seahawks, like the Houston Texans, the defense was elite with Zach Allen, Nick Bonito, Jonathan Cooper, John Franklin Myers, who's about to be a free agent as well. Patrick Surtain missed some time. Riley Moss and Jahdae Barron were both underwhelming this year, and the defense was still great. I thought this was a phenomenal year number 3 for Sean Payton in Denver, and it's getting an A. And then we have our second F in this division. I mean, going into the year, if I would have told you there were 2 Fs in the AFC West, you probably would have guessed maybe the Raiders, maybe the Chargers or the Broncos. But yeah, the Raiders are unfortunately an F. This was maybe the most unwatchable team at times this year. I saw them in person on a Sunday game in November, and it was just unwatchable. It was just a disaster to watch this team this year. They go 3-14 with Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll gets let go. We know they're bringing in Clint Kubiak from the Seattle Seahawks. Chip Kelly ends up getting fired halfway through the year. Patrick Graham, their defensive coordinator, is going to Pittsburgh. Pete Carroll's son as the offensive line coach was also a disaster this year as well. Geno Smith, who they traded for, a disaster. Ashton Jeanty could not run whatsoever because the offensive line was a disaster, and the defense wasn't great either. Yeah, not a good first year for John Spytek as the main decision maker. We know that they're going to have the number 1 overall pick. They have Tom Brady calling some shots there in the ownership group. And then you also have a new head coach. They got some cap space this offseason as well. I want to say the future is bright in Vegas, and it feels like it. But if we're just grading the 2025 season, it's an F. We'll go to the NFC South now. We'll talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm giving their season a D. They go 8-9. They miss out on the playoffs, and it feels like they've been regressing over the last few years. They end up having a nice season in 2023, losing to the Detroit Lions in the divisional round. Then they go 10-7 last year, but then losing to the Commanders in the wild card round. And then they lost Dave Canales. They lost Liam Cohen. This year, Josh Grizzard was not the best offensive coordinator for this team. I thought Todd Bowles was going to get let go this year. Yeah, they had a bunch of injuries, and Baker looked like an MVP candidate maybe after the first 6 weeks of the season when they got off to a 5-1 start, but this team definitely hit some regression in the second half. Emeka Ibuka, Bucky Irving, these guys were either banged up or disappointing at times this year. Mike Evans was banged up. Chris Godwin was banged up as well. The defense, specifically the linebackers, were not great for this team. The offensive line dealt with a lot of injuries. So yeah, I'm giving Tampa Bay a D. They were expected to win the division this year. They don't. They go 8-9. It's funny because they beat Carolina in week 18, but it doesn't matter though because of the 3-way tiebreaker. And I'm actually giving Carolina an A for winning the division with the same record as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, also because they actually put up a hard-fought game against the Rams in the wildcard round. This was a phenomenal year for Dave Canales, and what also felt like maybe not the greatest Bryce Young year as well. Like outside of a couple great games against the Falcons this year, he was underwhelming at times for sure. But hey, he showed up against the Rams in the playoffs. Rico Dowdle was great for this team. Ted McMillan ended up winning Offensive Rookie of the Year. I thought Jalen Coker showed great progression in the second half, and the defense looked a lot better as well with Derek Brown healthy again, with Nick Scorton as a rookie. They have really good secondary players. They signed Trayvon Morgan free agency last offseason, obviously having J.C. Horn as well. I'm excited to see what they end up doing this offseason and what general manager Dan Morgan is going to end up doing, and hopefully realizing this team still needs to improve, but they're taking a step in the right direction. They win the division. It wasn't too long ago this team was one of the laughing stocks of the NFL. They give the number 1 overall pick to the Chicago Bears, which gave them Caleb Williams. So yeah, vibes are high in Carolina. We'll see how they look this offseason. I'm giving the New Orleans Saints a B, and honestly, you can give them an A. I thought this was going to be the worst team in the NFL this season. They go 6-11. I thought this was a terrible job for Kellen Moore to take, and I thought he did wonders with it. I think Spencer Rattler looked better than expected, and Tyler Shough definitely looked better than expected as well, and it feels like they found their franchise quarterback. The offensive line looks solid with Banks and Fuaga, their recent first-round picks at the tackle positions. Alvin Kamara was good when he was healthy. Chris Olave was really good this year when he was healthy as well, and for the most part, he was healthy compared to previous years. Cameron Jordan still gave them 10 sacks. Chase Young got 10 sacks as well. Kool-Aid McKinstry and Alontae Taylor look like foundational pieces in the secondary. They're going to have a top 10 pick in this year's draft as well, so I'm excited to see what they end up doing going forward around Tyler Shough. But I'll say this was a successful season in New Orleans. And then for the Atlanta Falcons, I'm going to give them a C. I mean, they end up going 8-9. It was just a disastrous first half of the year. They end up starting off the season 3-7, and then they go 5-2 in the final stretch with Kirk Cousins at the helm. And Kirk Cousins is most likely not going to be on this team next year. They end up hiring Kevin Stefanski, Matt Ryan, Ian Cunningham. As Terry Fontenot is gone, Raheem Morris ends up getting fired. Michael Penix gets hurt again. He's dealt with so many injuries in his playing career, and he's already 25 years old. He's going to be 26 in May. They have their franchise running back in Bijan. They have their franchise wide receiver in Drake London. We'll see if they bring back Kyle Pitts, who probably had the best year of his career, or at least the best year since his rookie season. The defense looks so much more improved this year. The secondary was great with Terrell, Bates, Xavier Watts. Caden Ellis was a great linebacker. Jalen Walker and James Pierce Jr. look great as rookies, but now you're dealing with the whole off-the-field issues with James Pierce Jr., who knows how that's going to be resolved in the offseason as well. So Matt Ryan and Ian Cunningham have a lot cut out for them in the offseason. I thought about giving them a D or a C. I ended up going with a C, but Falcons fans, you can let me know if it's a D. They also don't own their first-round pick from the James Pierce trade last year, which I guess is looking a little bit worse now with everything going on. Houston Texans here in the AFC South, I'm going to give a B2. They end up winning a divisional game in blowout fashion to the Pittsburgh Steelers, but they end up losing to the New England Patriots in the divisional round. They end up going 12-5, finishing second in the AFC South, a better division than expected going into the season. It's just a little disappointing, and I think what's holding them back from an A was kind of the regression in CJ Stroud again. We've just been going backwards since his rookie season. Maybe it wasn't a Bobby Slowick issue. Maybe it's a CJ Stroud issue, and he's got to change some things in the offseason. He didn't really have much of a running game this year with the weird Joe Mixon injury going into the year, so it was a lot of Nick Chubb and Woody Marks. Nico Collins was good when he was healthy this year. He missed about 2 games. I'm excited for year 2, Jaden Higgins. Hopefully we get something back from Tank Dell next year. But this defense was arguably the best defense in the NFL with Daniel Hunter and Will Anderson on the edge. And this secondary was so elite as well with Derek Stingley, Jalen Petre, Kalen Bullock, and Kamari Lassiter. Azeez Al-Shaair was great as well for this team this season, all under DeMeco Ryans. The offensive line looked improved as well, so it was a little disappointing. This team did not make maybe a conference championship run. I'm giving it a B because quarterback play and just everything going on was kind of like an F or a D, but everything else was an A. For the Jacksonville Jaguars, I'm giving them an A. If I would have told you that Travis Hunter was going to only end up playing 7 games this year and really not look great as a corner or a wide receiver, just looked fine on both sides of the field, you would have been like, damn, 9-8 season, something like that. No, they go 13-4. Even with BTJ's regression in year number 2 at the wide receiver position, Parker Washington looked great for this team. Liam Cohen obviously was a phenomenal offensive mind. They keep Grant Udinski as their offensive coordinator, who was kind of like a hot commodity as a new young head coach on the market. The defense looks solid this year for Jacksonville, and at least is taking a step in the right direction as a franchise. Hey, they won 13 games, the most in the Trevor Lawrence era. So I'm giving them an A. The Tennessee Titans are going to get a D, and it's just because of Cam Ward. Without Cam Ward, this season was an absolute F. They fired Brian Callahan this year. Their interim head coach ended up being Mike McCoy. Callahan went 1-5. McCoy went 2-9. Calvin Ridley was a disaster, getting paid a ton of money as a wide receiver 1. Cam Ward had to throw it to Alec Maynard, Shamari DK for most of the season. A little bit of Van Jefferson, a little bit of Tyler Lockett. It's just like a hodgepodge names out there. Tony Pollard was fine as a running back, but I think Cam Ward really looked good. I think the tape looked good this year. He made some really good throws. That his receivers really didn't benefit him too much either. Jeffrey Simmons was great this year. Maybe their only good defensive player in the grand scheme of things. The offensive line was kind of inconsistent at times. So you could give Tennessee an F, and I'm fine with that. But I just think off Cam Ward's play alone and how I'm optimistic, I like the Robert Saleh hire. I like the Brian Dable hire as the offensive coordinator. I think we're heading in the right direction. They have to make some big moves in the offseason, though. A team that just had a tale of 2 halves. First half of the season, A+. Second half of the season, F-. So I'm meeting right in the middle at a C. It sucks that Daniel Jones ended up tearing his Achilles. Who knows what his future is going to look like, at least with the Colts. He's a free agent. I'm assuming he's going to be back. Will he be healthy for week 1? We'll see. Shane Steichen goes 8-9, but this team ended up getting off to a 7-1 start. Through 8 games, they looked like maybe the best team in the league. They were 8-2 at one point, and then they finished the season on a 7-game losing streak. They had to bring Philip Rivers out of retirement. That's how bad things got. Anthony Richardson gets an eye issue, so they can't even play him. When Daniel Jones ends up going down, Riley Leonard didn't look great in his first game as a starter. Philip Rivers went 0-3 as a starter for this team, and that's what Jonathan Taylor looked like he was going to win. Maybe MVP throughout 8 weeks to start off the year. He still had 18 touchdowns. Alec Pierce was great. Tyler Warren was good in the first half. Michael Pittman and Josh Downs, I think, were fine for this team as well. So yeah, it just comes down to like first half was an A, second half was an F. meeting in the middle at a C. And we're going to go to the Detroit Lions here in the NFC North. They are going to get a D from me. Detroit ended up going 9-8. So yeah, they ended up going above 500. I'm giving them a D. This was a tough division in a way. And every team in the NFC North went above 500, but with tiebreakers, they ended up finishing last technically. So a little bit of regression for Detroit after going 15-2 last year, but shockingly losing to Washington in the divisional round. They lose Ben Johnson to the Bears, Aaron Glenn to the Jets. John Morton already gets let go. He loses play calling duties midway through the year. Dan Campbell takes them over. I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs was great this year. Amon-Ra St. Brown was great. Jameson Williams was great. David Montgomery was fine for this team. Sam Laporta gets hurt. The offensive line was inconsistent. The secondary was a big issue for this team as well. I think with just expectations, I'm giving them a D. For the Chicago Bears, they are getting an A. This was their best year, maybe since their 2006 Super Bowl appearance. Definitely their best year since 2018 when they won 12 games. But this one felt more exciting because there was a limited ceiling with Mitch Trubisky as your franchise quarterback. There was a very high ceiling with Caleb Williams as your franchise quarterback. And I think his first year with Ben Johnson was great. They beat the Packers in the wild card round 31-27. Caleb Williams made some phenomenal throws for this team as well. They ended up going 4-3 throughout their first 7 games, and then they would rattle off a 5-game winning streak after that. I thought just all the young receivers looked great. Colston Loveland as a tight end, Luther Burden. Irma Dunze was banged up this year, but still looked fine, I would say, in the first half. The defense was improved, still has some work cut out for it in the offseason, specifically that defensive line. But the fact that the Bears barely lost to the Rams in the divisional round, it's an A. For the Minnesota Vikings, I'm giving them an F this year. I know they went 9-8, but it's just a disaster as Kwesi already got fired as the general manager. Brian Flores is going to stay as the defensive coordinator. It feels like Kevin O'Connell, who won Coach of the Year last year, is going to be on the hot seat because of how much of a disaster J.J. McCarthy was this year. They handled the Carson Wentz backup situation horribly as well. Justin Jefferson looked underwhelming with his numbers because of how disappointing J.J. McCarthy was. Jordan Addison was suspended going into the year, and he was underwhelming as well. Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason were both fine. T.J. Hawkinson was kind of non-existent, but the defense was great under Brian Flores, so it's kind of a shame this team ends up going 9-8 this year. Maybe it's a little harsh to put it at an F. You can maybe also put it at a D. It's just watching Sam Darnold win a Super Bowl when he was in your locker room. He was in your building last year, and you chose J.J. McCarthy. I'm not going to say that I would have done anything differently. I like the idea of Sam Darnold, and I thought you have a good quarterback already. I wasn't high on J.J. McCarthy whatsoever coming out of Michigan, and maybe he could still be a good quarterback in this league. It just hurts a lot when you let Sam Darnold walk, who didn't even get paid like an insane amount of money either, around $30 million a year. And I know you use that on guys like Javon Hargrave, Jonathan Allen, Will Fries, Ryan Kelly, but a lot of those signings, yeah, just didn't really fully work out. So I'm giving them an F. And then for the Green Bay Packers, I'm going to give them a C. They go 9-7-1. They get the 7th seed again here in the NFC playoffs. Basically the same story over the last few years. Last year, losing to the Eagles. 2 years ago, beating the Cowboys and then losing to the San Francisco 49ers in a close game in the divisional round. It felt like the offense didn't really hit its stride this year. Micah Parsons tears his ACL. Matthew Golden was a disappointing first-round pick. Josh Jacobs wanted, I think, a little bit more action as well. The offensive line was banged up a ton this year outside of basically Rasheed Walker. And the secondary kind of became burnt toast at times this year as well. They lose their defensive coordinator, Jeff Halfway, to the Miami Dolphins. People thought Matt LaFleur could be on the hot seat. He ends up getting an extension. We're going to see where Green Bay is going to go. They could still win the division next year. It's going to be a tough division to win. And then let's go to the AFC North for the final division here. We'll talk about my Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm giving the season a C. If you honestly want to give it a D, I'm fine with that as well. They had such a disappointing defense for the most expensive defense in the NFL with Cameron Hayward, TJ Watt, Patrick Queen, Jalen Ramsey. They go 10-7. They end up winning the division in week 18. Tyler Loop should have hit that field goal. I kind of wish the Steelers didn't win the division because they end up getting blown out by the Houston Texans 30-6. Aaron Rodgers might be back. Mike McCarthy's the head coach. Like, I'm not optimistic about the future now whatsoever. It's just kind of the same old story with this team. The wide receivers outside of DK, even honestly including DK, looked underwhelming this year. Their biggest bright spot was Kenneth Gainwell and Jalen Warren on the offensive side of the ball. The offensive line was improved. I mean, I'm glad it's a new offensive coordinator, offensive-minded head coach, and defensive coordinator next year. Times are changing in Pittsburgh. I just hope they realize they need to take a step backwards to have 2 steps forward. Or maybe we're just going to go 9-8 next year with Aaron Rodgers at the quarterback position, losing the wild card rounder in week 18 again and get knocked out of the playoffs. and I'm having the same conversation next year. And then for the Baltimore Ravens, I'm giving them a D. I mean, they were dead to rights at one point as well. They started the season 1-5, and then they rattle off 5 straight wins. Lamar Jackson was banged up. Madubuke was banged up. Basically, everybody in that secondary was banged up. They got another elite Derrick Henry year. He is just aging like fine wine at 31 years old. They extend Mark Andrews. I assume that Isaiah Likely is going to be gone. They fire John Harbaugh, and they bring in Jesse Minter. I am so excited about Jesse Minter here in Baltimore. They end up bringing in Declan Doyle, the offensive coordinator from the Bears this past season, who's going to call plays because he's not calling plays in Chicago. So it's technically a promotion going forward. I think the Ravens are going to be great next year. Yes, they do need to re-sign Tyler Linderbaum. They have to sign some type of receiver or add another one to Lamar Jackson. So you can give it an F. That's fine with me. But I'm more excited about the Ravens' future with Jesse Minter than I definitely am with the Steelers with Mike McCarthy. For the Cincinnati Bengals, I'm giving them a D. I mean, Joe Burrow, after leading every single passing statistic in 2024, gets hurt this year. He only ends up playing 8 games. They trade for Joe Flacco, who goes 1-5 as a starter. His only win being on that Thursday night game against the Steelers, where they put up 33 points, where Terrell Austin and Mike Tomlin are doing no changes, and Jamar Chase gets like 15 catches in that game. Chase Brown was fine for the team this year. Chase was fine when healthy. Higgins was fine when healthy for this team, but this defense and the offensive line were total disasters. Joe Burrow was questioning retirement. They don't fire Zach Taylor. I'm giving this season a D, and you can honestly give it an F. It looked a little bit worse because of Joe Burrow's injury. And then lastly, the Cleveland Browns, I'm also giving them a D. They go 5-12. I mean, their 2025 draft class is looking pretty good with Judkins, Defensive Rookie of the Year, Carson Schwetzinger. Myles Garrett ends up winning Defensive Player of the Year. It's crazy. They had D-Roy and Depoy, and they won 5 games. I mean, I don't think they have their franchise quarterback. They trade away Joe Flacco. Dylan Gabriel was bad. Shedeur Sanders was bad as the quarterback objectively, although they did win a couple more games with Shedeur Sanders as well. Maybe he's their quarterback going into next year with Todd Monken, their new head coach. They lose Jim Schwartz as well. He resigned from this team this week after just kind of getting blindsided and not getting the head coaching job. It's a solid young roster as well, and they're going to have a top pick in the draft. They need to add to the receivers. They need to add to the offensive line. And maybe they got to find their franchise quarterback. I'm giving them a D. So yeah, that is going to be for me. I hope you guys did enjoy. Let me know what you agree or disagree with down below. How would you grade your team's 2025 season? It is officially the off season, so make sure you're subscribed. We're going to have a ton of off season content here on the channel. Catch y'all on the next one. Peace.